Hello, everyone, and welcome to Asian Viewpoints with marysit. Imagine a living contemporary museum right on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., a landmark that tells the story of Asian Pacific Americans, a story that's vital to the American story. Well, now there's a massive effort to build such a museum, and here to tell us more is Chao. She is a modern Chinese historian who lectures at Rice University. She's also a leader in the Houston community, serving on the boards of the Museum of Fine Arts Houston and also the Houston Ballet. And she's the co-founder of the Friends of the National Asian Pacific American Museum. Anne, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Mary, for having me.
So, Anne, why do Asian Americans need their own museum?
Well, I think that if we go to visit the mall right now, there are museums that show the whole nation who visit Washington, D.C., what the important historical concepts, narratives of the United States are. However, and we do now have an African American museum, we have Asian art museum, but there is no museum that would explain the life histories and accomplishments of Asian Americans. And I think for our children, for ourselves, our children, our grandchildren to visit the mall and not to see anything that represents us is just a missed opportunity.
What parts of the Asian American story are not being told on the national level? I mean, you go to different museums, you see little tidbits here and there. In Houston, we have the Asian Society Museum, beautiful. But what's not being told?
Well, the museum will be an all-encompassing, all-inclusive Asian American museum. We'd like to think that it will represent as well the Pacific Islanders, but that is a question that we will talk to the Pacific Islanders community. But it is we would like it to be totally Pan-Asian museum. So we include East Asians, Southeast Asians, South Asians, and hopefully members of the Hawaiian Pacific Islanders community. But we are in the very beginning process talking to every representative selected experts in each of the sub-Asian ethnicities, and we'd like to hear their opinion.
So, and when you look at the Asian Pacific Americans, it is a broad group, and within each group is a huge subgroup with their own distinct stories, which you basically alluded to. How would you decide what to include in this museum? Because it's huge, right? Asians are so different from each group, Koreans, Japanese, Chinese, etc.
Exactly. It's a very good question. I think if you use a federal census guideline, there are probably 40 sub-Asian groups. And how are you going to decide who is going to get in the museum, what is going to be a museum is a very important question. Right now, we have structured a group called the task force. And within the task force, there's a smaller group called the steering committee. So the steering committee is made up of academics in different sub-Asian fields. So we have Japanese Americanists, we have Chinese Americanists, or other experts who understand or who write histories about these different ethnic groups, sub-ethnic groups. And we also have civic organizations such as Densho, which is a collection of Japanese history. We have SADA, which is a collection of South Asian oral history. And we have other organizations that represent different groups of Asians across the country. We are conducting interviews with all of them, soliciting their opinions, what narratives they'd like to see, what kind of names they'd like to have us make sure we mention the museum, what kind of objects we should have in the museum, and then how should we structure the entire representation? Should we go by chronology? Should we go by ethnic groups? Should we go by themes? And we're right now, this is an ongoing topic of discussion. And I think it'll take many months when we finally manage to talk to everybody that we have assembled.
That is a huge group and a lot of things to put together. How do you keep this from getting political?
We will explain that this is not a political effort. This is a cultural, historical effort. And as a result, we will just not get involved in the political agenda of each group.
Okay. So your group wants this museum to be built on the National Mall, where 11 of the 20 Smithsonian museums are already located. Why the mall?
The mall has very important significance. It represents the nation's capital. It represents what would be considered an important presence. If you are on the mall, that means you are a member of this society, a bona fide represented group in this country. I'm sure we can build a wonderful museum off the mall, but I think the significance of being in Washington on the mall with the other representation of the Smithsonian is just priceless.
And is there space for another museum on the mall?
Well, we're looking, the space is very tight. Perhaps there is a possibility. There is an old arts and industry building that right now is kind of has temporary exhibits, and potentially, if we can lobby for it and get it, then we will have a foot on the mall.
Is there a model museum you want to pattern this after? You know, the most recent one I think is the African American Museum, and I haven't been there. I got tickets, but not enough time to go. But everyone raves about it. All the people I know who've gone there, and it's just amazing. It's a very moving experience. You start in the basement with slaves, and you sort of work your way up, I think. Is there something in your mind or in the committee's mind of what you want this kind of museum to, the effect you want to have on people?
Well, the museum has to be state of the art. I know the African American Museum is wonderful, very emotional when you go through from the basement all the way to the top. We will have stories that will be told probably with more artificial intelligence kind of technique. We probably will have a smaller footprint than the African American Museum. So in the museum, we will have to take advantage of the technology in order to convey as many stories as possible, but with less of physical object and physical representation. But because we are representing the entire Asian American community, we will have to be very strategic in how we put together stories and how we move people through the spaces.
When you say living museum and contemporary, does that mean that exhibits are constantly changing? Or there are like 2 or 3 core permanent exhibits and then everything else is to keep it fresh, always changing?
That is to be discussed, and we are in conversation with people who actually are experts in building a museum, and then we can decide that once we have talked also with all of the members of the steering committee and of the task force.
How much will it cost to build this?
Well, I think, I'm not exactly sure, but I think the latest museum that are about to be launched by the Smithsonian are the History of Women Museum and the Latino Museum. And I think one of them, it costs upward of, $500, $600 million. So I would expect our museum to be at least in that range, if not even higher, by the time we manage to pass through all of the political approvals, if you will, through Congress to get this museum. So I would imagine 800 million or even $1 billion. But if we used an old building, such as the Arts and Industry building, we could cut down on the cost because we are start from scratch.
How much of this would be federal funding? How much would be from private donations?
I think judging by the other museums that have come down the pipeline, Smithsonian, it's probably 50% private philanthropy and 50% federal, but that all depends on Congress. And then I think every museum has to go and talk to people in Congress, and then it may meet different kind of allocation.
So what can we do to help? And when I say we, individuals who hear about this and go, you know what, that's a great idea. I want to get involved, but I'm just a regular person. I'm not in Congress. I'm just, a citizen. What would you say?
Well, I would urge everyone to talk up the project and also talk to their congressman that, even though we're early in the game, would you, write to the Congress saying that if this bill comes to pass, please support it. We're also looking for funding because we need to fund the commission. We're looking at funding our own operation as well as the commission. And so we will need a lot of funding. We have a website. I think it's just called Friends of, the National Asian Pacific American Museum.
Right. Friends of the National Asian Pacific American Museum. Just type that in and it pops up. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, but we really need, in terms of just mainly support by having your congressman know about it and eventually vote yes on.
And are you taking contributions now?
We are definitely taking contributions now. So a big thank you in advance.
So even if you don't have a huge amount to give, just little small amounts will show Congress that a lot of people want that to happen, right? $10, $20 here and there, but just hundreds and hundreds of that.
Right.
That would help.
Right.
What's the completion date? Do you have a date of when you would like to, your wish date of when this
I,
will appear?
yeah, well, I don't know when, well, the commission, once it's formed, has 18 months in which to produce a report. The report will then go to Congress and then have it approved. And then once it's approved, which in itself, we are not sure how much time that'll take, I would imagine maybe 10 years, or even less, we're fast to build a museum. So I would imagine 2030 something.
So our grandchildren can enjoy this museum.
We can too.
Hopefully, yes. And thank you so much for being on the show and telling us about this wonderful, wonderful project.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you so much for taking an interest in the project.
If you enjoyed this interview, please click the like button below and be sure to subscribe to this channel so you'll never miss a show. I'm marysit. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again in the next video.